What's going on, guys? It's your boy Beatsbyash, back at it again with another banger of a video. We are currently almost a full month into the OPO5 Awakenings of a New Era meta, and so I felt like today would be a great time to bring you guys a tier list video. Seeing that we have not done one of those in quite some time, I'm going to try to make this video as brief as possible, so I'm not going to go too in depth on any of my takes. Just wanted to give you guys a quick little peace of mind on where I'm at in the format. And before we go any further, I want to give a huge shout out to everybody who's been giving me positive feedback and support as of recent, because you guys are really driving me to continue going on this journey. This holiday season has, really put a lot of doubts in my mind about whether this is what I should continue doing, as this year and the Christmas that just happened makes 10 years without my father being with us, and I've just been unsure about whether I should keep pursuing this path in general for this channel or doing all of my videography work, and if I should just focus on a more high security job and career that would allow me to consistently support my mother and my other aging family members. But I've just been praying about it and, telling myself that I'm right where God wants me to be, and this is what my father would have wanted me to continue doing, as he was the person who set me on this path, making sure that I could attend these competitive events, from a very, very young age. And so without you guys, I wouldn't keep doing this. Every time someone tells me that I added value to their life and to their skill set, it really just pushes me to another level. I really live by these words that Branch Warren said it best. I'm here, number 1, to win, number 2, to be the best in the world, and number 3, to take care of my family. So anytime someone actually receives value from what I'm putting out there, it just pushes me to a whole nother level, and I couldn't be here today without, all of the support, all of the feedback that I've been getting. And so I want to make sure that everybody out there who has ever, given me any form of engagement, who has taken anything away from the value that I put out there, knows that I see you, my guy, I recognize you, and your support means the world to me. After this video, I'm going to be taking a quick break for this week, as I will be going out of town to a Comic-Con, and I'm going to be recording a video for my other channel, and I hopefully will be back next week in order to record a tournament gameplay video for you guys. I know a lot of people are excited about that, but without further ado, let's get into the goo. Alright guys, we are now over at tierlistmaker.com. If you want to make your own, I'll leave a link to that in the description. But I'm going to go ahead and define the tiers that we will be using today for this tier list. Starting off the top, we have Majority Top. These are going to be decks that I consistently expect to be represented by multiple pilots in the top cut, and I don't think that will be to anyone's surprise. Next, we've got Can Top. These are decks that I expect will be seen in the top cut by 1 or 2 people multiple times during the format, but maybe not at every single event. And then below that, we have One Top. This category is mainly for people who are one tricks of a specific leader that will most likely find a way to get One Top represented for the deck over the entire duration of the format. And then we have Local Enjoyer, which is going to encompass a lot of different decks. These are decks that you probably shouldn't go into a major event with high expectations of doing well, and are probably better suited for action at your local game store. And then lastly, I have a final tier which I have already filled out for us, because these are leader cards that don't have any actual implications for playing the game, but these cards have a pseudo purpose outside of the game of being a piece of cardboard that I wouldn't feel any guilt of using as an ashtray for one of my cigars. So if you ever need to smoke a nice cigar, make sure to go ask someone at your locals who has one of these, because these cards are not really usable in the game itself. Starting off, we have the Blue Luffy. Now, I think this card has quite a bit of potential, seeing that most people haven't gotten around to playing with it because it has been pretty difficult to acquire. I'm pretty sure that it came out in some kind of pack that you got for entering a specific event, and it was actually decently difficult to pull at that. I don't personally own one, but my friend does, and this leader presents a very interesting ability. This card reads, when you have 3 or less cards in hand, on attack, Dawn 1X, you get to draw a card. I think that in general is just a good ability to have if your deck is based around just having a lot of high quality cards. This is just a nice little added bonus, but it doesn't dictate what style of gameplay you're trying to go for. And I think it's probably the best blue leader for building a blue deck that's focused on just using the best blue cards available. Previously, that was Blue Croc. It doesn't necessarily incentivize you to play specific archetypal cards such as like Blue Doflamingo. You don't really want to run all the Warlord cards outside of that deck because there aren't as many incentives, but you might want to play a blue deck just to use strong cards such as like Sentamaru and the events that we've gotten in the past couple sets that really increase the quality of removal for blue. And so for that reason, I'm going to put him in the one top category because I think there's going to be some one tricks out there that could definitely make this work. Next up, we've got Blue Doflamingo. I'm going to have to put him behind the Blue Luffy for right now. I think that this leader is in a little bit of a better position than it was last format. While it does have some bad matchups at the top, I do think that it's more beneficial for this leader to be in the meta game when green is not nearly as prevalent as it once was, as that was always the worst matchup for this deck. And if you can win the die roll, you can go on a hot streak with this deck, and I could easily see someone doing that with the deck considering how high in popularity it is. And I think there's also just been a couple new tools added to the deck. Personally, I'm kind of interested in the 5-cost X-Drake that lets you rearrange the deck, because it's always been one of the pivotal points of the deck is when you don't see the cards that let you manipulate the top of your deck, then you're not really doing what your deck is trying to do. And that combined with the new premium removal that we've gotten, I think that this leader is in a little bit better standing than it was before. Next, we've got Blue Purple Kaido. I think this is just a local enjoyer for sure. It's really hard to rate these leaders that are focused around a ramp mechanic when you compare them to Purple Luffy, which doesn't require you to run any of these ramp cards that are required in other strategies to make the deck work. And also, you need a large benefit to justify playing a 4-life leader. Next, we have Purple Yellow Croc. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I'm a Blue Purple Croc enjoyer, and even I will say this ability is kind of interesting, but ultimately the playability was just completely hindered because the color they combined it with yellow just has no synergy with what the deck's trying to do. And that's one of the biggest caveats I've had with the game recently, is the decks that are actually good that use 2 colors are the ones that were actually receiving support for the archetype they're in for both of the colors. Why the fuck is this leader yellow? Not much to be said about that. Next up, we got Isho for a very similar reason. I don't think that the colors he is in mix very well, nor do I think his ability is sufficient enough to overcome the 4-life disadvantage. Next, we've got Red Green Law. I'm going to go ahead and put this as our first pick in the can top category. This leader ability is still an effect that should have been printed almost 1 to 2 years later in the game, and it has that thing going for it that I addressed both Croc and Isho do not have, where the archetype being the Supernova's keyword has support on both sides of its colors, and it gets access to some of the highest quantities of searchers in the game. On top of that, I just think this leader is generally going to be very good against yellow decks, because yellow decks typically have a hard time getting rid of a mass amount of blockers in a very efficient way. And I think that this deck is also extremely highly skill based. So there's always going to be that core group of Law fans that are going to get there with this archetype for those reasons. Next up, we've got Kazuki Odin. Sorry to my boy Austin, he's going in the local enjoyer category. The Odin support is not there, but I have seen a couple new Wano cards that look pretty interesting. Maybe down the line we could get there, but I think there's just better options. Next up, we got my boy Blue Purple Croc, RIP Croc. I really wanted this card to be good last set with the new Baroque Work support, but I have one question for you, Bandai. Why the fuck is Miss All Sunday so understated? I mean, that's all you got to really say about this guy. It's like, we got support, but all of our cards are extremely low card quality, and we're already at a disadvantage with the type of controlling game we want to play with only 4 life. So in general, I want this guy to be good, and I think he has some of the highest potential to be later down the road out of any other leader. But for now, he's going to have to stay on the local scene. Next up, we got the Boogeyman Whitebeard, aka the Cheater's Delight. I'm going to go ahead and put this in can top. I think that in the USA, this leader is always going to do better than in Japan, because over here, people just have a hard time figuring out how to go against a person who has 6k power and understanding how to attack and defend efficiently. But I do think that this leader has quite a few bad matchups among the current top choices, and so I'm not going to bet on this getting there every time. While I do think that the removed restrictions do put it in slightly better of a spot than last format. Now we've got our boy Garp, local enjoyer all day. RIP my boy Nightwing. We're still waiting on the Garp support. It's just this leader ability in conjunction with the fact that these two colors don't have many synergies. The leader ability has basically no synergies in general with the red cards, and as well, now that like the black cards are getting more efficient where they don't require you to use an additional like reducer or discard cards to use their effects, there's just very little incentives to use this over something like Sakazuki. Next up, we got my boy Kinemon. I'm going to put this in the 1 top category. We saw this last set where green was still not very prevalent as it once was, but Kinemon is really the only mono green deck that's interested in playing a tempo game. And I do think that some people like my boy Andreas, who, you know, just consistently force this deck, can definitely get there with the right matchups. And if you're wanting to play a mono green deck, I think this is going to be the one that you have the highest potential chance to be competitive with the current speed of the game. And the new Land of Wano card that's coming out in set 6, I think does add additional value to this leader. Next up, we got Emporio Ivankov. I'm going to put this in the 1 top category. This deck is similar to Doflamingo in the way that you win the die roll. You can go on a large hot streak. And one of the things that I enjoy most about this meta is I feel that it's probably the widest open meta we've seen so far in the game. And in general, the game has been more diverse than other card games in their infancy. And it's because the best deck isn't necessarily 15 to 20% better than the others. And so we're going to have quite a few decks in this category, because if you feel very comfortable with a specific leader, there's a good chance you can do well. And with the high skill level of Emporio Ivankov combined with the new premium level of removal, I think this deck gets a little bit better going second, and I wouldn't be surprised if a 1-trick was able to slide in there. Next, we've got my boy Magellan. I'm going to have to put him in local enjoyer. These categories at the top are kind of more ordered, but the local enjoyer, I'm not really putting any specific order on them. Magellan is just a leader that got power creep by Purple Luffy all the same, because the best card in their deck is also played in Purple Luffy, and at that point, it just makes him obsolete. Next, we got my boy Z. I'm going to put him in the 1 top category. I think this leader is very underrated. I think that the power level of this ability in a vacuum is very strong and has a lot of potential. And I actually went against a Z player in a regional about 6 months ago where he started off 5-0 in the tournament. And that was in a very red-centric, aggressive format. And I think what was holding Z back before is not because of his ability or his card quality, but because it was a really fast meta and they could just pressure you and end the game before you get value from your leader ability. But now we're in the slowest metagame that we've seen thus far. I think Z has more applications, and with the increased quality of cards in its archetype, I think there's some definite potential for brewing with this leader. Next up, we got Smoker. I mean, he just got power creep by Blue Black Sakazuki, and before that, he got power creep by Rob Lucci. Enough said. Sucks. He's one of the coolest guys who has a cigar in their picture, but he's just not really doing much, and there's really no advantages to playing him. Bandai, why is Katakuri just a power creep version of Smoker? I'm still waiting for that answer. Now we've got my boy Ace. I think this should go in the one top category for sure. People like my boy Justin Meeker, who just play this deck all day and night, can definitely find a way to get there if they go against the right matchups. I think that it's a bigger advantage over any other leader to have the removed restrictions of the 4-cost Marco, as this deck has very little defensive capabilities, and that 4-cost Marco just allows you to prolong the game a little bit longer to finish off your opponent. So I definitely think there's some potential there. It's really just the fact that red decks in general aren't in the best position that's holding this guy back. Next up, we've got Kuro, local enjoyer for sure. I mean, green decks weren't in a good place before, and they're not going to be anytime soon. I think I would rather just play something like Kinemon instead of Kuro, and so I'm going to have to put him at the local level. Next up, we've got Arlong. He just got straight up power creep by Belo Betty. Belo Betty does everything you want to be doing with this leader even better, and she's not even that high potential in terms of the top decks in the game, so we got to put him at the bottom end of the ladder. Next up, we got Nami. I'm going to have to put her in the one top category. I think last format, there were multiple people who were able to go on a hot streak by triggering Impel Down All-Stars and just finding their way into a top cut at some regionals. And I think the deck gets a little bit better now that people are trying to play a long game, because going against those aggressive strategies, and especially Whitebeard, were some of the hardest matchups for this deck, and I definitely think it has potential. Now we got my boy Rob Lucci. I'm gonna have to put this in can top. It's okay, I'll wait. I'm here to farm engagement. Send all those negative comments my way. This leader is the goo. I mean, a lot of people are gonna doubt this guy, but the fact that you can use Spandom to add 4-cost Rob Lucci, and as well, there's additional incentives to now play 4 copies of Airdoor again, that is a huge advantage to this deck. And while there are some bad matchups like Blue-Black Sakazuki in itself, just being able to more heavily access the 4-cost Rob Lucci is a huge advantage, because in general, that's just a fucked up card. Next up, we got the multicolor Big Mom. I'm gonna have to put this at the local enjoyer level. I haven't looked at this leader in a long time, and I really didn't want to look at it again. There's just, generally speaking, no advantages to this leader. Next up, we got the Venom that is Katakuri. I'm gonna have to put this in definitely can top. This leader has a lot of merits to be played at big events, for the reason being that the good cards you got in the Skypiea package, you could also just slot into this deck. The fact that yellow gets another 5k body in the form of a 2k that can summon itself from life is really irritating, because when Katakuri is able to consistently summon a character from their first and or second life, it's very difficult to win the game no matter what deck you're playing. And I think that puts this leader in a really strong position. Next up, we got Grape Doflamingo. This deck has quite a bit of potential, and people just aren't playing it enough to really show where it stands in the meta. Now, it's kind of on the border of one top and can top, but I just think that since people haven't played with it a lot, you can catch people off guard with cards like Birdcage, and in general, the 10-cost Doflamingo is my number one pick for the most oppressive late game drop in the game. I think it's higher value than a 10-cost Big Mom if you're able to stun down very beneficial attackers from your opponent. And the fact you have a searcher to access that card now adds a lot of merit to playing this deck, especially because when you consider yellow Big Mom as like a really oppressive thing to do back to back, well, their searcher only looks at top 4. Dofi's searcher looks at top 5, so it's going to be easier to find this guy. Next up, we got Queen. I'm going to put this in the one top category. This deck is really strong if you go against yellow strategies like Katakuri, because it's really difficult for those decks to get around a large mass of blockers. And it does have a high skill gap as well, so one tricks are definitely going to be able to get there. And for the same reason, I'm going to have to put Rebecca in that same category. The archetypal support that this leader has is some of the strongest card quality for a specific type in the game, and it's just a really complicated deck. a lot of people don't have experience playing against it, and you can take a lot of people off guard, which can be a huge advantage. Next up, we've got Red Green Luffy. Sorry, this leader is never going to be good in the game. RIP all of the Copium users. Next up, we've got Red Luffy. This leader isn't bad per se, but everyone knows just all of the other decks you could use the cards this leader uses, just use them completely better, and the ability just has such a detrimentally lower value in the game now that on play is like almost mandatory in order to not get blown out with how high value removal is. The times you would see the most success with an archetype like this are when you're using cards to full potential like Nico Robin. And nowadays, if you play Nico Robin, that's just going to get blown out by someone's Rob Lucci or a Houndblaze before you actually get any value from it. And at that point, you should just play Zoro. Next up, we got Eustace Kid. RIP Eustace Kid. The days of your viability are long gone. The Doflamingo deck uses the film package better, and the 8-cost Eustace Kid is just so much worse than it originally was with how easy it is to remove things in that category now, that I just don't think you have any legs to stand on with this deck. But if there does become some very strong generic green support, this guy will easily rise back up, as it just has one of the most generic, strong leader abilities that we've seen so far. And now we've got our Blue Crocodile. Blue Croc, I would say, is very similar to the Blue Luffy. I would put a higher preference on the Blue Luffy just because I think, especially now, that this leader ability just has way less relevance than it did before, and the cost to using it is so high. The only advantage you have to using this leader is that you can put Missile Sunday in your deck. But in a meta where events just aren't that great to have in general, I think it just really diminishes the value this leader has over using other substitutes. Next up, we got poor old purple Kaido. RIP Kaido, man. This guy was not very good in the beginning. He's still never going to be good again. I mean, the fact that Purple Luffy is in the game means that Kaido is always going to be gatekept from retaining his Yonko status. And then we've got Sakazuki. I mean, for the same reason as Smoker, this guy was never good. He's never going to be good. There are just better options. Next up, we've got Yellow Big Mom. I'm not a fan of this leader, but somehow Mike's wife, aka Loading TCG, was able to get there with a Yellow Big Mom top. And if she forces it again, I'm going to have to put some respect on Mike's wife. Personally, I wouldn't play it, but I definitely see the reason for wanting to do something differently. And it's not that much worse than Katakuri. And Katakuri's already in a really good place, so it's definitely possible. Now we've got our Black Luffy. Let's go ahead and put him next to Smoker and as well Sakazuki. I don't think I've ever seen anyone use a single card from this starter deck, and I think it's probably like the worst starter deck ever created. Next up, we got Yamato. Slightly better starter deck than the Black Luffy. I don't know why Bandai decided to introduce this product though, and then one set later, go ahead and power creep the only viable card in that deck, which was the 5-cost 7k vanilla, with a 5-cost 7k vanilla that has the keyword we actually want to see. I'm going to have to go ahead and put this in local enjoyer. RIP my boy Austin once again. Next up, we got my main man, Red Zoro. I'm going to have to put this in the can top category. I think this deck is nice right now, and if you're able to use it to its full benefit, it can occupy a very nice spot in the meta, assuming that you're going against people who are occupying a lot of slots in their deck with late game bombs, because we're going to make sure they don't get to that point. And then we've got Red Black Sabo. Haven't seen anyone use this so far, and I don't think there are many benefits to using this color pair, so I'm going to have to throw him in the local enjoyer. Next up, we've got Belo Betty. I'm going to put this in the one top category for now, but I do think it has more potential as we go on. We saw one person top a treasure cup so far with this deck, but to me, what's holding it back, we don't have the 3-cost 4,000 power Treasure Cruise Sabo. That card is a 1 Dawn investment to make someone 7k, which just enables all of the other pieces in your engine. And I think once we get that, I would feel more comfortable putting it in the can top category, but I currently don't know when and if we're going to receive that card. We have got Don Quixote Rosinante. I'm gonna have to put him in the local enjoyer tier. I just don't understand why they gave a really interesting ability, being able to use your leader to protect a character on a leader that only has 4 life. I think that's just such a huge disadvantage, and they could have definitely tweaked this leader to make it way more viable, considering it's using 2 colors that are probably in the bottom end of like high card quality together. Next up, we've got the Boogeyman Sakazuki. In my opinion, this is the best deck in the format. The fact that both of the abilities this leader presents are free and at no cost, combined with the fact that this leader just got archetypal navy support in both of its color pairs, is literally insane. When you think about the level of consistency of this game, the reason you can get away with using 1 searcher or no searchers in this deck and still find immense success is because after you've used the cycle ability 4 to 5 times, that just starts adding up to be worth more than drawing a card and not discarding a card. And in general, they fixed the 2 biggest issues with black. The first one being that all of your good cards required you to go -1 in card advantage by discarding something, and also all of your removal required you to use an additional card to reduce the cost of something. Being able to remove both of those disadvantages just put this leader way above everyone else. And it's like the fact you're seeing way more cards than other people without like losing all your life with something like Whitebeard is just completely outrageous. Next up, we got the main man, Purple Luffy. Really love this deck. It's not as strong as Sakazuki in the way that it's just not as good against that matchup. And I think that Sakazuki is probably going to be the highest represented deck at major events. And so for that reason, it's kind of a notch down for me. But I do enjoy the aspect of this being the first viable ramp deck in the game that's also not autopilot. It's kind of similar to Katakuri in the playstyle, except a lot of the decisions you're making really have an impact on you winning the game, and that's something I've come to enjoy, as in any card game that's not typically the case with whatever ramp deck is actually viable. Next up, we got Anel. I'm gonna have to put him below Purple Luffy. I think that this deck is really strong, but not because the cards they received in this set are particularly high value, just because the main thing making this deck work is that you're putting your opponent on a different way of approaching the game because they need to do an additional damage, potentially multiple turns in a row. That's also allowing you to see more cards, and I think that in itself is enough to just gatekeep a lot of the lower tier decks that don't have like a large advantage to pick them over one of the top decks that has the highest quality of cards. But I also just don't think that this deck has a good matchup into Purple Luffy, which is probably going to be like the 2nd or 3rd highest represented deck. And for that reason, I'm going to have to put it a notch down. If you're expecting to see way more Sakazuki than Luffy, you could switch these 2 spots. But for me, I'd rather plan on going against a wider metagame. And in general, I just don't think that this deck is as consistent as the other 2 options, being that some people don't even play the Skypiea Searcher, and the cards that you can search off of that searcher are not generally like insanely high card quality. So I think you're relying on a lot of just winning games based off of it being a good matchup for yourself, whereas like with Purple Luffy and Sakazuki, that's not necessarily the case, and you can kind of find what you're looking for to answer the matchup you're in. Now we've got Red Purple Law. I think this deck is very similar in power level to Red Green. Maybe it's slightly better than Red Green, just because removal is so high value right now that in the matchups where your opponent is making it difficult for you to occupy 5 spaces on the board, sometimes Red-Green Law is going to take a hit. And considering these decks are kind of trying to play a somewhat similar game plan, I feel like Red-Purple Law is just a little bit safer, but I definitely could see how some people could feel that Red-Green Law is better than Red-Purple. Next up, we've got Red Purple Luffy. I'm gonna put this in the 1 top category. We've seen people find success with this strategy, but the biggest thing holding me back on it is that I feel like it does a similar thing that Purple Luffy does, except Purple Luffy allows us to forego one of the biggest disadvantages of a ramp strategy, which is having to dedicate slots to allow you to accelerate mana or Dawn at the beginning of the game, because you just get that for free. With Red Purple Luffy, you have to play cards like Zoro Joro and stuff like that to get you out of the early game. Purple Luffy, you don't have to waste slots on that. And also, while you can consider that both of these leaders start at 3 life because you're going to be using your leader ability turn 2 and turn 3 with Purple Luffy, the big difference is that this leader lets you see an additional 2 cards, then starts at 3 life. Whereas Red Purple, you just start at 3 life, and I just don't feel that the leader ability has many implications other than going from 8 to 9 to play your 9 cost Kaido a turn earlier. That's just my opinion, and I think some people could definitely prove me wrong, but right now, that's where it's sitting at for me. And then lastly, we have Red Purple Kid. I'm gonna have to put this in local enjoyer. This leader doesn't have any major incentives for you to choose it over the other 2 leaders in that starter deck. Considering the leaders were intended to be using all the same cards, I think the other 2 leaders just get more value out of those cards available. I think that the downside on this leader's ability is just so high, in my opinion. You can't expect for 3 leaders using all of the same cards to all be extremely viable, so I guess it is what it is. But that's going to be where we line up here. Let's take a moment to quickly just like readjust the slots in the rankings of all of these top decks. Definitely going to put Katakuri at the front, then probably Red Purple Law, and then I feel like Zoro is probably in between both laws, but they're all like very like similar power level. And then I'll put Whitebeard next, just because people just don't understand how to play against this leader still. And then I'm gonna have to put Great Dofi here. There's just such a high surprise factor with this leader, as well there is with Rob Lucci. He's just a tad lower power than these other leaders. The removal you're getting is generally just better against like lower to the ground strategies. And as you can see from this tier list, not all of the top players are gonna have like low drops for you to kill for free, and so that kind of puts him like at the bottom end of this category. And then the one top category, I think that these are all interchangeable. This isn't in any specific order, similarly to these other 2 categories below. Make sure to let me know down below what you agree with, what you disagree with, and as well, what you're enjoying most about this format. I think it's just the most diverse meta game we've had so far, and I'm really enjoying that aspect of being able to just play whatever you're most comfortable with and find at least some amount of success, because that hasn't been true in every single meta so far. Thank you so much for getting this far in the video. I'll see you guys back next week, and as always, if it's not the goo, it's got to go. Peace.
Ooh, is that indigo?